Hi, and welcome to part 2 of the 8x13 HO layout. So, first things first, you can see that I'm going ahead and taking apart all of those frames that I spent so much time building. It's the unfortunate fact that with layouts like this, it's up and down, up and down. But on the plus side, these sheets of plywood, I get to reuse them. So what you're seeing here is I'm cutting up the plywood and ripping it into strips, 3.5 inches wide. And I'm going to give you guys the shortcut version instead of the long version, so you don't have to see that it took me about 40 minutes to rip up those two sheets. So next here, so we've got our curved benchwork done. I already ripped it down to size. You didn't see me do these really complicated shapes, in part because I didn't want to show you how I did it. These shapes can be kind of difficult to cut and somewhat dangerous, so I don't want to show that to you. But what you're seeing here is I'm starting to build the frame. I'm building it on top of the 1-to-1 print, so I know it's going to be exactly the right size. It's going to fit properly, and all of the holes are going to be in the appropriate locations because I already know where the track is going to be. So in this case, I'm putting in the cross members. Normally about 16 inches on center is my maximum. I like to do it a little narrower or a little wider depending on the needs of the layout, but 18 inches is my absolute maximum. So the guy in the orange shirt, that's Josh. I call him my shop helper, and if you can afford one, I really do recommend it. Josh is a great hand. So in this case, he's actually helping me finish up a couple modular layouts that are being shipped out to clients while I'm working on the custom layout here. So I got the basic frame of the first module built, and I'm starting to work on the second frame. And you'll notice that the two pieces are actually curved together, and I actually built that frame all at once. You saw me do that on the last video, and then I actually split it off screen so I was ready to go for this second part. So this is module 2 of 5, and you'll see here in a second that I actually cut that back piece about 3/4 of an inch too short. So everybody makes mistakes. And I'm using pocket screws here to connect everything together. The beauty of pocket screws is really the fact that you can make changes later on. All of the screws and hardware are easily accessible, so even if you've got module frames back to back, you can even pull the piece of benchwork framing that's butting up against another module right out from underneath the layout. Even with custom layouts like this, it makes it nice because clients on occasion do tend to change the layouts a little bit. Alright, so we've moved on. So I'm starting to sheet the layout here, which is kind of a fun part, and I got a shortcut. So what you just saw there is me using a router with a 1/4 inch flush trim bit, and what I did is I just screw the plywood in place in a couple spots where I know it's supposed to be, and then I just run the router along it. And now you see that I threw the paper template on top. I'm starting to cut the paper template to size and accurately mark it, so when I do cut out the final shape, I can go ahead and do that. And then in the background here, I'm starting to lay out the other 1-to-1 prints, and you'll notice that these are actually the full length of the layout. And this fancy printer that I have, I actually got it on Craigslist, believe it or not. This is capable of doing 42 inches wide by 600 feet, I believe it is maximum length, and over that 600 feet it's actually fairly accurate. So with these prints, it was only off by about a 1/16 of an inch over 14 feet, and that's in part because of the printer settings I had. If I go with the more precise ones, it would be right on. So anyway, what I'm doing here is I'm printing, taking the print and I'm gluing it down to the plywood surface, and preparation for me cutting the plywood later on to the correct shape. So when I start putting the grades into some of these pieces, everything's ready to go. So I glued everything on, now I'm pulling it all back apart. Seems weird until you realize I pulled out the jigsaw and the circular saw, and I'm starting to cut holes in it. And in the background here, Josh is taking his lunch. Well-deserved break. None of these boxes he's moving around are actually light. They all weigh somewhere between 50 and 70 pounds. So it's a lot of plywood, but it gets clients what they need, so keeps everybody happy. So I've got this one pretty much ripped apart, and you notice that the middle part there is actually pretty wiggly, and that's actually the start of one of my first grades. So I'm going ahead and resecuring the plywood surface on this one, and this one's basically done for the moment. I'm not going to install any grades because I don't know where it is going to final land at this point. On this point here, on this module, you notice that I'm using a piece of scrap plywood and I'm not covering the entire surface. I know the back half of this module is going to have some serious grades on it, and I'm actually going to cut those later. But what I did here is, again, using the router, went ahead and just screwed it down and then cut it the final shape with the router, and then actually used the scrap and screwed that down to fill in the little piece that I was missing. So now I got the paper template glued down, everything's secured, ready to go, and we're going to switch things up here in just a minute, cleaning up the shop. I try to keep a clean shop as much as I can, but nobody's perfect. Alright, so we reset the shop. So on to phase 2. So you can see Josh in the background here, and we'll cut back and forth with Josh and me here a little bit. But what I'm doing here at the moment is I'm actually screwing down some risers, actually the same risers I used to make these curved pieces, down to my outfeed table to go ahead and secure that in place, make sure it stays in the right shape as I start building the cross members for this other module. This is actually module 5 that I'm working on. So it's the far end of the layout, and I'm bouncing back and forth. I'm drilling a bunch of holes, and again using pocket screws to secure the piece in place. Meanwhile, Josh is going back and forth and cutting all of the sub-road bed for the rest of the layout. So this actually saved me quite a bit of time because you know, it is time consuming to build a layout this way, but you'll see on the end of this video and the next video especially where this comes in real handy, and the speed in which we build this layout is really good. So keep in mind that everything you're seeing in this video today is 1 day of construction. By the end of this day I was actually pretty tired and actually didn't finish the final module because I was just so tuckered out. So again, we're bouncing back and forth, and Josh is moving on to piece number 2 for the templates and the sub-road bed, and I'm going to pop over here and help Josh with that. So what I'm doing at the moment is just giving him an idea of what I want him to do as far as layout to make best use of the plywood, and then I'm going to go back and start cutting and installing cross members here on the module I was working on. So you'll notice that Josh and I, we bounce back and forth and help each other when we need to quite a bit. And the idea again there is it makes for a more efficient workshop. It's safer when we can move big sheets of plywood together, and you know, it just saves us some time. And you'll see off in that far left corner over where it says "Go Vote." I actually pulled a couple pieces of plywood from over there. That's actually the same plywood that I was ripping up earlier in the video. So it's the same stuff that I had built all of those curved frames with. So, and the idea here is recycling. I'm not gonna throw out a perfectly good sheet of plywood just because it has a little bit of glue residue on it. I'm gonna recycle that, sand it down, and then go ahead and punch a bunch of holes in it. So the Benchwork has all the proper wiring and bolt holes and other things. Here I'm doing something kind of cool. So I was having trouble setting the angle between Module 5 and Module 4. So what I did is I went ahead and threw a couple pieces of 3.5 inch plywood out there and threw the curve piece for Module 4 on top of those. And then using the risers that I had already screwed in place on the table, I knew it was in the right place, and I could go ahead and mark the inside and outside to set the angle. And then obviously I asked for Josh's help again, because cutting that giant piece on the miter saw without an extra hand is kind of dangerous. My table saw is actually about 3/4 of an inch higher than my miter saw, however, so you did see that I had to shim it up with a piece of scrap plywood to make sure that the square was cut, and it worked really good. So I do this actually pretty much in every single layout, it looks like. So this is actually layout number 60. Yeah, that's right, 60. I've built 60 custom layouts that have been mailed or shipped or picked up from clients in this format. And this isn't the modular stuff I'm on my website that you can buy. This is stuff that is actually engineered specifically for the clients. Okay, so we got a better view here of what Josh is doing. So Josh right now he's marking about 1 1/8 inch, or so 1 1/8 inches from the outside edge of where the track is going to be. So what that does is that allows enough room for a little bit of cork, as well as a little bit of room to secure your scenery to. You'll see in the next video where I actually have to trim that back a little bit on a couple areas just because of the tight fit, but we'll get to that later. So now what you can see I'm doing, I'm actually working on the back half of module 4, which intersects in that tight curved radius spot. And again, with the pocket screws. You know, this can seem a little repetitive, but when you're actually doing it in person, it's actually quite fun, because you know the amount of math and geometry in particular is quite involved. So we'll bounce it around a little bit, and we'll give you a little bit of a fast forward here. And again, back to Josh. Here I was actually fixing the air conditioner. So I figured to cut this so you guys can see what Josh is doing. That little wheel color that Josh is using is actually made for cutting fabric. And it works really well unless you hit a screw with it, which is why he's having to use the box knife to trim the little extra pieces of paper tape, or paper anyway. So back to what we were doing. So we're securing the cross members again. Again, they're about 16 inches apart. Meanwhile, Josh is continuing to cut out the paper templates, and he's about to make a mistake here in the next minute or two, which is kind of fun actually. But he ends up taping a couple pieces together and making himself a circle when it's not actually a circle. So it's kind of fun. But see here in the back right hand corner, I've actually got a jig made for drilling all these holes. So the jig allows me to drill holes 6 inches apart with perfect 1-inch holes. I've got special sleeves and stuff to make sure that it lasts for a long time. And here now you can see I'm actually consulting the drawing to get a better idea of where all of the other tracks and layers are going to be on top of this. So I have a better idea of what I need to sheet fully and what I need to leave open so I can support the upper layers with risers later on. And then back over to here to Josh, you can see his semi-perfect circle mistake. And then we go ahead and take that apart, and I show him exactly what's actually supposed to be going on. So this is part of the track plan, which is actually going on the same modules that I'm working on, modules 4 and 5, which are at the top center of the screen here. You can see module 4 and 5. So what this does is it actually overlaps itself. So what I'm telling Josh currently is to go ahead and secure this in place, go ahead and glue the two pieces together, and then I'm going to have him cut out the extra bit. And then now we just laid a sheet of plywood on top of what I was working on to get going, and you'll notice that it actually is exactly 4 feet wide on the angle, and that was done on purpose. It was actually engineered that way to make sure that it would fit. And again, using the same technique with my router, I'll go ahead and just secure the plywood and then just route it out, and then I don't have to think about it, I don't have to measure, it just works. Same goes for the circular saw here. I just marked the 2 spots where the joints were going to be for the module, and then just ripped the plywood in half right on top of it. So you'll also notice that I always try to sand my edge after I get done cutting it, and that in part is just so that the slivers suck, to be honest. So it's to prevent that, as well as just to make sure it's a nicer product. So at this point, Josh is off doing something else, and we're cutting back and forth. Again, another phone call. It's been kind of crazy with this whole pandemic thing. I've been busier than I ever have been. So yes, I'm building this in the middle of a pandemic, and both Josh and I have been socially isolating for seems forever now. For me, it's since March 7th, so it's been a while. So what I did here is I showed Josh what it is, and he cut out the middle part. He's taping this back together, and then he's actually going to secure that down in a different spot. And then I'm going back and I'm actually now cutting the curved plywood into the two sections for the two different modules. So now I'm taking module 4 and I'm turning it so I can start working on module 3, which is actually the back corner of the layout. And I'm trimming the excess curved benchwork again. It's always the very last thing I do. So what this does is it allows me to make final adjustments. If I need to move that cross member a little bit to make sure things are square, I can. But the idea here is I don't want to overdo it. So back to Josh, and you can see he's gluing the paper down. And this glue isn't Super 77. It is actually it's a similar glue. It's found at Home Depot. I'll link in description in the bottom what the product is called, but it's at Home Depot and it's about half the price of Super 77. And unlike Super 77, which stays tacky and allows the paper to pull up, this stuff actually sets hard like concrete. So you can peel it back up, adjust it, but once it sets, it is stuck there permanently. And for the purposes of what we're doing here, that's actually a good thing. So depending on how you plan to build your layout, you might want to use Super 77 if you want to be able to peel it back off. But if you don't, you definitely want to use this stuff.
Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you liked what you saw and you're curious about what's going on behind me, go ahead and click that like and subscribe button. It doesn't mean a whole lot to you, but it's a huge deal for me. Thanks, and see you on the next video.